My name is Ramsay Clark, and I am here to spend a few minutes talking to you about my family's experience with mental illness. I think that those of us who have been through mental illness really owe it to others who may be in the midst of it or may encounter in the future to talk about or share our stories in hopes that something we say might prove helpful to them. And also, there still remains such a stigma associated with mental illness. And I think the only way to chip away at that stigma is to talk about it. My family is made up of my wife of 33 years, Karen, my 24-year-old son, Michael, who lives in Chattanooga, my daughter, Allie, who is finishing her senior year at Mississippi State, and last but certainly not least, her dog, Coda. Pretty regular, average family trying to make the point that it can happen to any family. Mental illness does not discriminate. Yeah, I think the number one fact is really the sheer enormity of mental illness. 1 in 5 of us have a mental illness. And to put some context around that, in a school setting, if you go to a school with 500 students, 100 have some form, statistically speaking, 100 have some form of mental illness. It's a huge number and a serious problem, a sobering problem, and it should be taken accordingly. My mental illness is bipolar disorder, referring to 2 different mood swings, one being depression and the other one being mania. Most of us are familiar with depression, having lived in the pandemic the last 18 months or so, and being isolated from classmates, isolated from colleagues, isolated from the community of church, isolated from out-of-town family. So on some level, most of us understand depression. Mania may be a newer term or a more unfamiliar term to you, and symptoms that are exhibited with those of us who have mania include anger, irritability, risky behavior. So those are some of the more prominent behaviors you see with mania. So another example of mania is I had mentioned that anger and irritability were symptoms. For me, one of my symptoms was road rage. So I felt compelled anytime somebody would cut me off in traffic. Not that that would ever occur in Memphis, but I felt compelled to run them off the road. And I don't mean just honking my horn or giving them a hand gesture. I meant getting my car as close to their car without actually our cars touching. And the really scary part of that is that, I could have hurt the other driver. I could have hurt myself, but more often than not, I had my kids or one of my kids and one of their friends in the back seat of my car. So they all could have been injured, and worst case scenario, there could have been fatalities. So that was a hard period. Keeping the family together statistically says that 90% of marriages end in divorce where one spouse has bipolar. So it really goes to the point where you need a network. My wife couldn't do it all. Nobody could. She was raising young kids. So she reached out to my brother. She reached out to the church, and all of them played a role in us keeping our family together. But that's a stark statistic with 90% of families with bipolar ending in divorce. And my kids told me, "Hey, Dad, suicide is a very sensitive subject, so you ought to warn the audience that you're going to say or mention a couple of facts about suicide." So every 14 seconds, somebody dies from suicide. So during the course of this shoot, anywhere from 30 to 60 people will die from suicide, and I attempted twice. So again, going back to a normal family, a regular family, it can happen to anybody. 22% of mental illness is inherited. So, it's an important question to ask if you think yourself or your spouse or family members might have a mental illness. Unfortunately, past generations have tended to sweep it under the rug. They thought maybe it was a chink in their family armor to admit a family member had mental illness. And I think that's why it's so important to be transparent. If you can tell a doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, say, yeah, my uncle or my grandmom had a form of mental illness, they can cut through a lot of stuff to try to get you the right medicine. And I would say be persistent. Maybe the first time you ask a question, the parents, whomever, are not willing. They're just not transparent. But keep asking, and maybe another family member will reveal that fact to you.
Are there certain age groups that are affected more?
Yeah, there are a couple of age groups that are most prominent. when it comes to mental illness. The age group from 14 to 24 is very much at risk, and I think that points to all the seasons of change they go through. They enter high school, that's a change. There's peer pressure associated with that. They begin dating. Unfortunately, sometimes rejection is involved with dating. They go off to college. They're without a network, a support network. Medicine is everything, and for bipolar, which I know best, you cannot manage without medicine. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people with a lot of excuses, and I was one of them, so I get it, who say, well, I don't like taking medicines, and I don't like the way medicines make me feel. And, I'll take medicines the rest of my life because that's how I'll manage. I don't like taking medicines either. Now, once the medicines begin working, the feelings that change on the front end, they just stabilize you. So, and I like to tell people, look, it's really not about feelings as much as once you understand the value that medicine plays, and I know firsthand for bipolar, I suspect most mental illnesses require some form of medication. Why keep suffering and making yourself and your family miserable if a medicine will relieve some of that? The financial impact is huge. For me personally, I was let go of a job I had held for 17 years. So I lost, even though they gave me a very attractive severance package, it took me a year to get back on my feet. So I lost a year's salary. Not only the emotional drain of, hey, I'm the breadwinner and I've failed my family, but globally speaking, the impact, the economic impact is $1 trillion annually. I had to look that up. That's 12 zeros. That is a huge economic impact. So if you're an individual, if you're an employer, you really need to take this seriously. Depression combined with anxiety is the number one cause of disability worldwide, really pointing back to the economic impact that has when people are unable to return to work, impact on their companies, impact on themselves, on their families. So, yes, it, again, number one cause combined with the anxiety of disability worldwide. First time, and then they often take their first job, and these days, ever since the pandemic, typically a first job looks like you being isolated in your apartment working remotely. So you have no community. You don't get an opportunity to meet your work colleagues. So that's a impressionable group, and the older generation. They've lived long enough to experience loss, whether it's family members, whether it's spouses, whether it's jobs, and they can be vulnerable as well. Takeaways are important, and I do want to give you ammunition that you can begin using immediately. Psychologist and psychiatrist, the difference being a psychologist is more talk therapy. Psychiatrists write scripts for medication, and they're both essential. And we have a shortage of both in our city. So my recommendation, if there's any sense that a family member may be experiencing some of the symptoms, is make an appointment. Often they'll tell you, well, we're 3 months out. That's okay. I mean, get on somebody's calendar, and I can help with that too. I know the psychologists and the psychiatrists who are taking new patients, but that's critical. And then, resources, the internet. Today, you can Google anything, and if you suspect one depression or anxiety or bipolar or schizophrenia, if you suspect a certain type of mental illness, Google it and Google symptoms of bipolar, and you can get a checklist and we're seeing all of those symptoms, and I hope to provide further resources by partnering with an organization where it will be more than just me. But for the time being, you're welcome to email me at ramsayclark1@gmail.com. Ramsay is a bit tricky spelling, RAMSAY 1@gmail.com, or call me at area code 901-412-5200. I do have a day job, which is a good thing, but be patient with me. If I get inundated, then I'll take them as I get them and as my job allows.